Hello, everyone. Welcome to TeaTime, a special edition. It's special in more ways than one. First of all, and perhaps the most remarkable, we're actually early, 8 minutes early today. That is truly insane, unprecedented.
What about
for the
all
show.
the people that expect us to start in 8 minutes, Teapot?
Yeah, I mean, they should have been here early.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they should have been here. They should have been here early. In that case, that's
Okay.
big mistake there. And of course, we also have some very, very special guests here to talk about the upcoming expansion for Guild Wars 2, Janthir Wilds. Please welcome Bryan Yarrow and Cohen, also known as CMC. Thank you so much for hopping on board, taking some time out of your busy schedules to come and talk to us about the expansion. Welcome, gamers.
Yeah. Super excited to talk about Janthir coming up. Happy to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So hoping to get some fun tea time in today.
Absolutely.
Tea time? It's on a Monday, so I don't really understand the format. It's like...
It's
Absolutely.
the mythical mid-week tea time.
It is.
Keep talking about this, and y'all finally made it happen.
It's finally happened. And of course...
Another special edition. We have like the nighttime tea time and then the Monday tea time.
Okay. Exactly.
Yeah. And of course, we've also got Lara and Sneb. You know, they're here too, I guess. And
Ned is here.
Yeah,
We're here.
to get us started
Taking a
on
break
this.
from his PvP adventures.
Well, he's taking an indefinite break right now, I think, but maybe he'll be back. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. I think a good place to start would be some brief introductions, actually, on exactly what's going on here, and kind of an overview, an introduction to who exactly are we talking to here. So let's go ahead and start with Bryan. Tell us what's going on.
Hey, so yeah, I'm Bryan. I'm one of the leads in ArenaNet. So I work on combat systems. So that's stuff like game modes, combat features, enemies and encounters and stuff like that. I've worked more hands-on. So I'm currently in the lead position. I've worked kind of more hands-on in the past. So I've worked a lot in the kind of like encounters area. So I did stuff like Dragonstorm. I did Xunlai, Jade, Junkyard. A lot of different combatants, worked on the Cryptus, Umbriel, stuff like that, meta bosses. Also collabed with Cal and the skills and competitive team on the soda weapons and stuff like that. So yeah, I've been kind of around doing stuff in the shadows. Not a lot of public stuff happening for me, but excited to be here on Tea Time, talk about Janthir. I think it's a pretty exciting expansion on our end. Lot of things that I'm really excited to see get into the players' hands eventually, and talking about some of them today. So yeah,
fantastic stuff. And I think many people here will be watching this are already pretty familiar with CMC in one way or another. But still, just in case anyone has missed it, tell us what you're up to as well at Guild Wars 2.
Sure. So I'm CMC or Cal, whatever. So I'm the competitive lead, so that falls under kind of Bryan's larger umbrella where he's touching a lot of different things, but I'm specifically focused on competitive, which is, PvP, World v World, and of course skills and balance, as we've, done so many skills and balance preview streams, and now competitive preview streams. So we're just like the streaming team, I guess.
Yeah.
Where everything we do is on stream. So here I am, once again, to talk about things on the
giving
stream.
the people what they want.
Yeah, we absolutely do love to see that. And again, just before we kind of get started here, a bit of an overview. We're going to be talking about a couple of things today. We're going to be talking a little bit about spears and some of the combat stuff going on there. Maybe a little bit about the PvP mode as well, what's going on with that, and convergences too. And actually, I'm going to stop talking a little bit and let some of our other hosts here talk about stuff, because Lara's very prepared for this. You should see all the questions. It's a full interrogation going on here. Okay, yeah. So I think I will let Lara go ahead and kind of start us off with the first quick question.
I feel like it's a normal thing to make a list when you do an interview. You're making this sound as if I over-prepared for this. You don't get this chance every time. Usually I just get to react to CMC on stream. Usually I don't get to ask the question, so I'm very excited about this. I guess I'm just excited about the spears, and I wanna almost start this off with a very almost question that I personally find interesting. Like, how does this the weapon design process even happen? Like, do y'all start with like some high level idea or like a niche you want to fill, a specific mechanic that y'all are envisioning? How does that process of like designing a weapon go from like its very first thought, like, hey, we want to do a necromancer spear, to like an actual finished weapon? What is that like?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of varies from weapon to weapon. Like a lot of them, some start with like the concept of like, okay, what role are we trying to fill here? Like this profession needs maybe a long-ranged power DPS weapon because that's something that they don't have access to. Sometimes people just like have an idea of like maybe the mechanic is what starts it off, and then you build on top of the mechanic, or you have like a visual theme. It's like there's so many different places that a weapon design can start, and I think for the spears they've all started in different places. We've seen this in the past with like lead specialization as well, where some of the designers have talked about like where you start. It's very similar for developing a weapon, where sometimes it starts mechanic or role or visual theme or any number of those things can be the starting point.
So what about like almost like, because again the game is pretty big, right? We've got PvE, we've got worlds versus worlds, we've got structured PvP. How do you sort of balance making a weapon feel good in all of those game modes? Because again, like a weapon can fulfill such a different role in each different game mode, I feel.
Yeah, it's really hard, and we do this to varying levels of success, where some weapons are a bit better in particular game modes and not as good in other game modes. I will say that we always go into the design process with the goal of making something that is good and usable in all the modes. Sometimes we are maybe focused a bit more on PvE or PvP or World v World specifically, just to make sure that this is a niche that this weapon needs to fill for this game mode, and
Right.
it's not as important for these other game modes that it fills that as perfectly, but we still want it to be usable. So
Right.
sometimes we hit the mark where it is like great or usable in all three game modes. Sometimes it doesn't always land perfectly, and that's something that kind of pick up during the live balance process, where it's like, all right, we have this weapon or this specialization that isn't quite up to par in this game mode specifically, and how are we going to approach that without maybe ruining the existing good gameplay for other game modes as well? Because we want to make sure that if something works well in a particular game mode and players enjoy playing it there, we don't want to do like a huge upheaval to the weapon. Be like, hey, let's just rework this weapon to try to make it work in all the game modes. We still want it to work where it does and plays well. So it's a tricky situation, but it's something that we try to do. It's just an iterative process to try to get it to land in all the game modes.
Yeah, one thing that I'm interested in asking about is that, of course, we have two-handed weapons coming with Janthir Wilds, where Secrets of the Obscure added like some one-handed and some two-handed weapons into the mix. Was that a very conscious decision with allowing essentially a full skill bar to create a more like cohesive weapon, or was that simply kind of a coincidence, just going with the spear? What was the thought process behind that?
I think it was definitely it was in the call. It was like something that we thought about, as it's like, okay, we could if we do spears, that means we have a two-handed weapon, and that means we have a full 5-skill kit to build off of, which is pretty exciting from the design standpoint, because we can make something that's just a bit more cohesive. And with the Soto weapons, we see like Ranger with Mace, like they are still two separate weapons that have to work with like Sword main hand, or I have Mace main hand with the Warhorn offhand, and all these different combinations need to play well and feel fluid together. Whereas two-handed weapon, you can build something that's just very cohesive. It plays off itself very well, and that's something that you can do to just make, not that like one-handed weapons are bad, but two-handed weapons can feel a bit more complete, I think, because you just have more room to work with.
Yeah. And kind of on a similar note, we might be going slightly off topic here, actually, so stop me if I'm going crazy here. But one thing that's very noticeable about the new weapon designs is that they often have abilities that interact with other skills within the kit, have a special mechanic attached to them, all that kind of stuff. And we start to see a little bit of that in some of the updates to older weapons. Like, for example, I think Trig was even joking on stream how, every hammer 5 recharges the 2 skill, for example, right? All that kind of stuff. Is a similar design to the newer weapons being added to the game? Is that perhaps something that is a goal to have on some of the existing weapons in the game as well, in future updates? Or are the new weapons added in expansions, for example, are they supposed to be kind of a little bit special in the same way that an elite specialization is being attached to an expansion?
I think it comes down to where it makes sense. We don't want to force a mechanic especially with existing weapons, we don't want to force a mechanic into a weapon just to have a mechanic. And we even do this with some of the new weapons, like the mechanics are less, I guess, involved, or like it's very specific mechanics rather. There's more like just synergies within the kit that feel more natural. Obviously, some weapons do have like pretty in-depth mechanics that are very specific to playing with that weapon, but that's not like a goal we start out with. It's something that, as we're designing the weapon, it's like, hey, this would be something that really fleshes out design or makes the feel just a little bit more interesting to play. As we're looking at old weapons, the joke is that 5 always resets 2, because that is a very, natural way to build in some synergy within the kit. And, Warrior Hammer was probably the first one to do this, I think. And Warrior Hammer is a great example of a weapon that's like, here's a weapon that's pretty straightforward, that doesn't have like any insane, very complicated mechanics, but it feels great. And, if every weapon was Warrior Hammer, I wouldn't be sad. Obviously, we want to have a bit more variation, but building things where it is like, this skill applies in condition that then this other skill plays off of is just as interesting gameplay wise as, the skill gives you a buff that then makes your next skill more powerful.
Yeah,
I feel like just in general, like some of these new weapons, they almost feel a bit like an elite specialization sometimes, with like their own little mini games and stuff that are going on. You're building up these bullets. On a necro spear, you're building up these shards and stuff. Something that I found in like the spear beta and also a bit of the soda weapons is that I really like these mini games, because they could really sort of transform the class almost. But because they're weapons, they can't add like brand new UI like an elite specialization can, right? Like how on Virtuoso you've got like the 5 blade counter and stuff. Have you ever considered doing like weapon specific UI? I know that it's, we haven't seen this for the Sodo or for the Janthir betas, but is this something you've ever thought about, especially as weapons keep getting more and more complicated?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about this. From the kind of more 10,000-foot view, it was something that we considered for the weapons, for the spears in particular. For a number of reasons, we decided not to do it. I can't go into exact detail on a lot of them, but on the design side, one thing that we were really concerned about was how that UI might clash with either existing Elite Spec UI or any UI changes that we might want to do in the future. Anytime we add something like that, we're not just adding something, but kind of constraining what we can do in the future. So ultimately, we decided to release the spears without UI like supporting in that way, like without new UI. There was more going into it than that, but that was a pretty major reason why we decided not to do it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the other note there is like, it's not that we're not saying that we're never going to do that type of thing. It's just like there are definitely problems to solve in how the UI gets displayed, where the UI gets displayed, how does it, like Bryan said, how does it conflict or obviously not conflict with existing UI. So there are some things to figure out, but in a perfect world, maybe that's something that we have the opportunity to do. Never say never, but there are problems still to solve.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's something that we are thinking about, and like Hal said, we're not going to say we definitely are or definitely not going to do in the future, but it's something that we consider every time we do a new combat feature that touches skills and presents new combat options to players like that.
Awesome.
Sneb, do you have a spear-related query that you'd like to throw into the mix?
Well, I was going to ask something a little bit similar. I was going to ask about how you avoid things becoming almost too powerful. Because whenever I read whenever I read these things, I'm like, this is gonna be like the best thing ever, because whenever you add new abilities, they can interact with the million other dominoes that are set up. So one falls, and then boom, you've knocked all of them down. And for me, Mace was like really powerful on Ranger because of the damage buff and the healing, and it just became like the de facto weapon that you must use. And so I'm curious about learnings from that experience and how you go and still have this preserve like the uniqueness and the playability of a spear with a unique effect, but don't like completely make it wicked overpowered.
Yeah, thanks Taylor for the maces, by the way. Just maybe a little bit overpowered. But obviously, when we're designing a new weapon, there's the question of like, what role does this fill? And then with the state of the game right now, it's a pretty old game, so there is always going to be a little bit of overlap. Where you see like the maces are trying to give you a little bit of room to use them in DPS builds, but there's obviously a ton of weapons that already fulfill those roles. So there is going to be an opportunity for something to be slightly better when it's new, and then it's like it pushes out everything else that already exists. And that's not really the goal, but it is something that happens sometimes, especially with like new stuff. And people might probably meme me about this because of how Ellie Spear landed. A lot of the time we might try to have things slightly overtuned during especially during betas, just because that is an incentive for players to play with them more. And if something comes out and there's a beta, it's like, oh well, this sucks and it's too weak, and then everyone just stops playing it. That kind of limits the feedback we get, especially in those early stages, which is not ideal. And obviously as we move forward toward launch, we want things to ship in a fairly balanced state relative to everything else. And that's not saying that we always hit the mark there either, because live balance is a process. As you said, there's so many different pieces that go into this game that it's hard to get everything to land perfectly. But when we have cases of overlap like this, we're really trying to introduce like different play styles, even if they land in like the same bucket. Like if this is a power DPS weapon and there's this other power DPS weapon, but they have like a slightly different play style, that's a way for us to prevent things from being like strictly better, even if they land to be significantly stronger in terms of like raw numbers. Those are things that we can always tune, but we want to make sure that there's not like a playstyle overlap. So I think like with Necro, there's a pretty good example here with like Greatsword versus now Spear, where they are both power DPS weapons, but Greatsword is supposed to be more of this like lumbering, deliberate, slow weapon, and Spear is trying to be more of this like fast-paced mobility assassin-y type weapon. So they are both power DPS weapons, but they both play fairly differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
just a
quick... yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sneb. Go
ahead. Mind if a quick follow-up to that? Yeah, one thing you mentioned earlier was, one thing you kind of just mentioned is that there's this idea that something is like a heal weapon, or that it like serves the specific role. However, there's sometimes weapons that serve this kind of like hybrid thing. Is this something that you're actively trying to do, where it's like, hey, this is kind of a healing weapon? Like we know that at a high level, maybe players are going to use this as a healing weapon. We still want it to do enough so that players can enjoy playing it open world and still experience it without making it so they're completely useless in whatever game mode they're doing.
Yeah, open world is a pretty important consideration, even though it might not seem that way to like a lot of players. Like obviously we want like PvP, competitive balance is super important, because your player experience gets worse if someone else's weapon is like overpowered or ruining the game mode. But like day to day, a lot of people are just running around in open world doing metas and stuff like that, and we want the weapons to feel good and feel like they have a pretty solid identity, so that players playing the game that way are like, I want to be, say the healer, then I can do that in an open world experience. But maybe they also just want to jam and have like some damage. It doesn't want to be like a pure healing weapon, because that's a little bit more limited in that more general gameplay. So sometimes we will try to put a little bit of damage, make the kind of damage healing hybrid weapons play pretty well in competitive modes too, as like more bruisery type weapons a lot of the time. So there is like a decent amount of space to build weapons that aren't purely support weapons or purely damage weapons. At the same time, it's a little bit dangerous, because then they can kind of step on multiple weapons' toes. Like if this DPS support hybrid weapon is better than the pure support weapon, then it's like, well, why do you ever play that? And similarly, if it's better than all the existing pure power DPS weapons, then why am I playing that when I can have also a bunch of healing on top of my new fancy shiny weapon? So it's obviously a delicate balance, and we try to We try to make it work, and I think we do a pretty good job, but some people will disagree, and I'm always open to that criticism because balance is never perfect. So feel free, chat. Fire
I've
away.
quite enjoyed how that's been working out in some ways. Like I think it's really positive that people can still be impactful in open world while playing kind of whatever they want. And I like that weapons can still fill a role at a high level too, though.
I think you hit on an important point there, actually, Sneb, where it's like people can kind of play whatever they want in open world and still be effective. One of our kind of goals that we've starting really in Soto was to expand the options that players have to play the way that they want. So like that kind of was one of the reasons, for example, why we unlocked elite spec weapons from their elite spec classes or professions. And things like that. So like when we start designing out like a new weapon, the question we usually start with is something like, what is the new kind of way to play that we're introducing here that players might want but don't yet have access to? So like the Necro Spear that Cal mentioned is a great example where it's like, well, Necro doesn't really have like a mobility assassin-y weapon. So that's like a new play style that we can introduce, expanding the number of like things that players can do, not just mechanically, but kind of in a fantasy or experiential sense, to kind of let players be the character that they want or have the playstyle that they enjoy the most in the game.
Yeah, and I kind of on that topic as well, like we're kind of talking about design space here a little bit. Of course, there's a lot of things in the game now. We've got a whole bunch of elite specializations and now, 2 sets of new weapons as well. Do you think that there is more, like, how much more design space is there around all this stuff? Is there still more stuff there, or is it going to be, will there need to be like a different direction in terms of like creating new combat features to the game in the future?
Well, I can't go into too much detail about what our plans are for the future exactly. We do, and I'm happy to leave the specifics of this answer to Cal because he's a bit more hands-on there. But we think that there's more space to explore in certain ways. This definitely isn't the end of us adding new options for players to the game. So those will continue to show up one way or another. Trying to think of how much I can say without giving away too much, but yeah, it's something that we continue to plan on continuing to do in some form or another. Cal, feel free to expand on that if you have anything to say there.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to add. Obviously, it gets more difficult every time you add something. You kind of shrink the possible space, but kind of like I was talking about before, where we can start to focus a bit more on play styles more than roles if the roles are all kind of filled and there are enough options for all of those roles. We want to make something that's just a copy of something that fills the exact same role in the exact same way. But we can try to introduce different styles of play within the existing roles to give a fresh new way to play the game.
Yeah, I think that was a really great distinction to draw there, actually, talking about playstyles versus like damage type and so on, or like kind of direct role. There's lots of stuff you can do there for sure. And I think that will be a good time to kind of wrap that topic up and move swiftly onwards to something that I think is really interesting, and that is Convergences, actually, which are popping up again in Janthir Wilds. Almost a bit of a surprise, I think, actually. But of course, they are going to be taking a slightly different form in Janthir Wilds. And yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about that. What's going on with Convergences in Janthir Wilds?
Yeah, so I think there's been a little bit of confusion over like what's happening exactly with the Convergence in J-Dub and what role it's going to take, how it's going to relate to the Raid Wing, which is fair because we're doing something kind of different than what we've done in the past with how we're positioning Convergences and especially the Raid Wing. So there will be Convergences in Janthir, as we've mentioned. We're actually going to have a blog about some of that coming up in a few days. So I don't want to scoop that blog too hard here. So I'm going to talk a little bit generally. But basically what you can expect is there's a kind of narrative event that occurs that the Raid Wing will be focused on. And the Convergence will be a different version of that same narrative event. So while the structure of those two things might be pretty different, because obviously the needs of 10-person content is pretty wildly different than the needs in like large-scale 50-person content. So just by that necessity, those two pieces of content will need to be structured pretty differently in terms of their mechanics, like the event structure, how they play out. But they will be covering the same narrative event, so they'll be in the same place, touch on or have a lot of the same characters in it. A lot of the kind of beats will be similar in terms of the storytelling. So that's kind of what's happening here. Again, it's a little different because in the past, raid wings have been their own kind of self-contained stories. And one thing that we're trying to do with Janthir is make the event of the raid feel more accessible to more players. Because in the past, raid wings have been awesome content for our hardcore folks, but a lot of our player base didn't really engage with them, either because there was perception that there was these barriers, the content was too hard, or it's just not what they wanted. They didn't want to spend the time getting 10 players together, or just the fact that they enjoy our large-scale content over that sort of content, maybe. I think Guild Wars 2's large-scale content is pretty awesome. I would put our large-scale content up against any other MMOs out there. So that's kind of why we decided to move all those concepts into kind of the same space, where the Raid Wing is going to be part of the larger narrative of what's going on in JW, as opposed to kind of its own self-contained story. And the Convergence will be part of that narrative as well, filling some of the same narrative roles that the Raid Wing does. For players that don't want to engage in that 10-person content, they can go and do our Convergence and have a great time doing that and get that part of the story as well, and not feel like they're being left out or that there's inaccessible content for them.
Yeah, that's sounds actually really cool. I have to say, actually, that this, I think, I completely agree with your analysis here, that raiding in Guild Wars 2 is really good, but it has struggled with some accessibility issues over the years, and that's why I'm really excited to see actually what's happened with this. Actually, I'm really looking forward to the fact that I get to do all the sweaty stuff and wipe to a boss for 50 hours. Gonna love to see it. Fantastic stuff. But also, like, one thing that I think is so great, and I think it's a fantastic point about the large scale content, is that when you have something like, a Convergence or an open world meta event, it really allows you to play with everyone, right? And especially, I guess this is the streamer brain here as well, but I'm like, oh man, I can only play this raid with 10 people. I want to bring the whole squad in here. I want to get the whole stream in here. And that's why I'm personally really excited actually to see what's happened with these Convergences. And yeah, like the idea that it is going to be an alternate version of the raid that we can kind of play through is fantastic, because like Convergence is something that I think had a lot of potential, clearly have a lot of potential in Secrets of the Obscure, right? But I think that it's really cool to see that there's going to be some updates to how these things actually play out, and there's definitely some groundwork there for that, obviously popping up down the line as well in future expansions as well. But I guess I'll open it up to Sneb and Lara. Maybe Lara's cat actually has a question as well. Wants to hear about Convergences. But what do you gamers have to say about that?
Do you think that, like, not to go into any details, I know we can't go into those, but do you think if, like, a new player or maybe somebody that's never raided before plays, like, the Convergence version, that might be a little bit helpful if they ever move into the raid version? They're like, hey, some of these things seem familiar. Like, do you think that might be helpful to someone?
I would like to hope so. It's not a specific goal of the Convergences to like bridge players into raid content. Just because we've actually done a pretty significant amount of looking into our raid and strike content and what causes some players to engage with them versus not, and looking at the numbers of engagement of those things. So we're not specifically trying to bridge players into that content. We're hoping that, like, if players play this narrative event and then are like, hey, I want to see the alternate version of this with the raid-like mechanics, that's great. But really what we're hoping to do is kind of similar to what I was saying before with the combat, like the spears and the weapons and combat styles, letting people play the way that they want. We have this really cool narrative event that's going to happen, and it's going to be very important to like the progression of the story, and we're trying to allow players to play it the way that they want. If players want to grind out those really difficult bosses in the 10-person squads, they can do that. If players just want to look at the event timer and be like, oh, J-Dub Convergences is up. Let's go do that. And then do that and get the story that way. That's fine too. Basically trying to make our content feel more inclusive to all of our player base is our number one goal with how we're structuring this.
Awesome. Yeah, that
I've got
sounds
a
great.
question along those lines too. So when you're designing something that is for a lot more players versus something that's maybe with 10, you obviously have to make changes mechanically so that it still retains some semblance of fun. Like I imagine if you went into Veil Guardian and Wing 1 and it only takes 4 people to stand in the green circle, that with 50 people, that's no problem. Right? So like the mechanic doesn't really matter anymore. So from an encounter design perspective, how do you ensure that Convergences still retain their fun and kind of the uniqueness of having all of those people and continue and balance so that the integrity of a raid where there's some complexity and some challenge, those are all still retained? How do you balance those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is that we use different mechanics for both versions. So, like you were saying, the needs, the mechanical needs of raiding content is really different than the mechanical needs of large-scale content where there's a lot of players. So in raids, you're going into that knowing, hey, we're going to have to figure out these mechanics. We're going to get stopped until we figure it out, and then we're going to need to execute on it. And it's specifically supposed to be a challenge that you're taking on. In more large-scale stuff, it's more difficult to put forward that level of like mechanical complexity because one, there's a lot more going on. It's a lot harder to parse exactly what's going on. It's a lot harder to organize 50 people as opposed to, it's hard enough to organize 10 people. So, organizing 50 people to do mechanics is really difficult, and it can cause player friction, which we want to avoid. So, a good example of this difference is if you look at Umbriel and Convergences and how that boss works. Obviously, that boss is using the same kind of visual language and skill language as Kanoxai in Silent Surf. They have a lot of skills that when you talk about them, they sound similar. There's spinning axes. There's the gaze attack. There's the clones that he summons. But because of the needs of Convergences as a large scale content versus a fractal like Silent Surf, those mechanics play out in really different ways. And that's kind of what we're looking to do, something similar with the Raid Wing versus Convergences in Janthir Wilds, where you'll see the same boss enemies, you'll run into those same encounters, and they'll use skills that use the same conceptual and visual language, so they'll look similar, but the mechanics themselves will be quite different. So in raids, those will be more complicated, where you'll need to organize, execute, figure things out, really make decisions about how efficient you're being, especially in the challenge and legendary modes. But and then versus in Convergences, where a lot of the challenge will be more about less about figuring out a puzzle or figuring out complex mechanics, and more about getting the group to do the basic things that you needed to do. Having people in the places where you need them, giving people the basic information they need to survive. So Umbriel as an example, watch out for the spinning axes. Don't stand in those, things that are simpler mechanically, but in a large scale context are also very difficult to pull off because of the level of organization required to move the entire group of 50 people in one direction or another.
That's awesome. I think that's really exciting. Would you say that there's kind of a similar mindset when it comes to LCM stuff, legendary challenge mode?
So I don't want to talk too much about ledge mode because it's something that we're still trying to figure out exactly how to do in the best way possible. We were really happy with how Ceres played out. That race for world first was incredibly hype, and I don't know about anyone else, but I was pretty glued to the streams watching that. It was very, very hype. And one thing that we're really looking to do with future ledge modes is try and recreate that feeling. It's very difficult because ultimately all we can do is put out the tools for the community to then take them and make something hype like that. So we're trying to figure out the best way to do that. without also burning out our developers, right? So without giving too much detail, we're very focused on how to provide that experience without being like, well, we're just going to build a whole new game mode on top of what we already had planned, which would be pretty difficult for us to do without like burning people out. So hopefully that answers the question. I realize that's kind of a non-answer. Feel free to follow up if there's anything that you would really like me to expand on there, but that's kind of the boilerplate answer, I guess.
Yeah. Well, to me, it just sounds like you really liked how Ceres went. You thought it was really exciting, and you just want to try to find a way, and you're still kind of figuring that out exactly, and how you can preserve that challenge and that fun that was the world first for Ceres.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like legendary mode is really interesting as a concept because kind of by definition, most players aren't going to play it because it's really difficult, and that's kind of the point. And at most it's like aspirational content for a decent chunk of players. But the fact that people aren't engaging with it in like a primary way, like directly, is okay as long as we aren't like breaking our backs to make it, and also as long as it creates kind of that secondary engagement where maybe I, as random Guild Wars 2 player, have never and never will play legendary mode Ceres, but I enjoyed watching the world first, and I enjoy reading about the strats as they, get refined over the course of time. So that's kind of what we're looking to do. Something that our, I guess, content creator and hardcore community is really good at is creating that secondary engagement and getting players hype about the game so that they maybe aren't inspired to go and play Ledge mode themselves, but are like, man, I want to play the game now. That was awesome.
Yeah, no, obviously I agree with that. I think everyone here's going to agree with that. But no, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I certainly think that having kind of that, as you say, that secondary engagement with the game it's really exciting. It's really awesome to have that about all aspects of the game, right? When we're talking about PvP or like big tournaments and like the new automated tournaments that have just been added to the game, for example, right? And like the world versus world stuff, and people are really hyped about world restructuring, and of course PvE as well. I absolutely think that it's a really fun part of kind of like the gaming experience, and certainly part of the MMO experience as well, is to have that kind of secondary layer where the community in a way like becomes the content to an extent for the game there as well. It's definitely really exciting. But I think you were going to say something, Lara? Going to leap in?
Yeah, I mean,
dive in?
I guess like you might watch that legendary mode stream, but I guess then you might go do the convergence version, right? You might go like, I'm going to fight that boss with 50 other people in this alternate version. So that seems super cool. Just again, having that super difficult legendary mode, but then also just having this convergence mode that many people might prefer, right? Not everybody has to become a super hardcore raider, right? But it's cool to sort of, I think, have these bosses that sort of appeal to everybody, right? To have these bosses that seem both exciting to us as people that play 7 hours each day, and also exciting to somebody that might just want to drop into a convergence like that. That seems super cool.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. That's a great distinction too of like the different player types. Where, like I was saying, our hardcore and content creator community is great at creating those hype moments, but at the same time, we have a lot more different types of players than just that community. So definitely, we want to make sure that everyone's able to engage the way that they want to engage, with the game, and if that inspires them to like reach out and play other different modes, that's like really awesome. Obviously, we want players to be playing as much of our content as they can. But yeah, we don't want to pressure them too hard to do it, because some players are raiders. They really enjoy that challenge. That's what they're here for. They show up looking to be challenged and to really hone their mastery of the game. And some players, they're here for an hour or two when they have free time, because they use it as a place to chill and talk with friends, and they just want to do some chill metas. That's cool too.
Yeah. And I guess maybe a final point on convergences here is that in Soto, of course, we had the challenge mode as well with some leaderboards. Kind of came out of left field there a little bit. Is that also going to be a thing happening in Janthir Wilds, or is it going to be kind of, because it's kind of like the raid, it would almost be 5 difficulty modes. You've got the challenge mode Convergence, then you've got also the norm mode raid and challenge mode, then you've also got legendary mode on top of that. Like, is that something that's popping up again as well?
Yeah. We'll be looking to do challenge modes both for the raid wing and for the convergence mode. Without getting into too much detail, that is something that we are going to be targeting. What challenge mode means is going to be a little different in those 2 modes, as you might expect, right? Because a challenge mode for a raid wing means something specific, and then, as we saw with Convergences and Soto, it means something kind of different in the way that we have to ratchet up the difficulty. It probably will continue, like in Soto Convergences, will continue to ask more of players in terms of organizing that large group, rather than asking them to be like really mechanically and execution precise, the way that a raid wing challenge mode might be.
Okay.
So many modes.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. It's definitely, so this is something that we were really focused on when we were doing pre-production in Janthir, where it's like, how can we do more, right, with what we have? We're always looking for ways to like make the way that we make things more efficient. And this kind of strategy that we're doing, where we're saying, well, what if we take one narrative event and create a bunch of content that all touches that narrative event, but maybe in different ways? That was one of the ways that we're trying to be more efficient with creating, being able to create that more content. One of the reasons why we were able to do the raid wing, which we were very happy to be able to do. I know we promised Wing 8, I think, a while back, and so it's pretty awesome to be able to deliver on that. So yeah, it is definitely a bit of an experiment in Janthir Wilds. I am pretty excited about it, though. I have a lot of confidence in the direction here, and hopefully when the rubber hits the road next month, we will see positive results.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah,
We're
it's
excited.
I think really, really exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very hype indeed with this stuff as well. Definitely looking forward to see how it pans out and how it all ends up. And I guess that will kind of do it for Convergences, I think. I think it's time to swerve away to another topic, actually. And that is, we've got a new PvP game mode coming. And of course, it's not specifically attached to the expansion, of course, because that's just how the way that works there as well. But yeah, I think that was certainly a bit of a curveball. I don't think many players expected that, that's for sure. But yeah, we would absolutely love to hear about what's going on there, what some of the design goals are with this, like, some of the, the problems that are looking to be solved in regards to like PvP and like how it currently plays out and all that kind of wonderful stuff.
Yeah, so you can give a little bit. We won't give you like the whole story for the PvP mode, because there will be some information coming out in the future at some point, not like too far down the line. I don't remember the exact timeline, so I'm going to look like an idiot. But that's fine. But in general, I would say that the main goal, there's a couple things I'll talk about. I'll talk about some of the goals for the mode, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about the process for what it's going to look like. I'd say the main goal for the new game mode for PvP is to build something that's a little bit easier for new players to understand. Because you look at Conquest and like, a 12-year-old, almost 12-year-old Conquest game mode now, where players are just so familiar and so good at the game that it's very difficult for a new player to come into PvP, queue up for even unranked. You queue up for unranked and you play against players that have been playing for so long. You don't really understand the point of Conquest. I go stand on this capture point and someone else is already there, and I don't know that it's bad for me to stand there. And people yell at me and it's really unfun. And, it's just a bad experience for new players. So I think one of the primary goals for the new mode is something that's a little bit easier to understand and not like a whole lot of insane complex depth on like the map mechanics, as much as it is going to be an opportunity for, not to say that there aren't any, it's not just a deathmatch mode, but there are less things to think about there and more room for you to just get on the map, learn how to play the game while playing the game mode. And we see it as kind of like a stepping stone into potentially Conquest. Conquest is still our primary game mode for the game. I'll definitely say that. The intent is not to make a new game mode that now we replace Conquest. Conquest is no longer the ranked season. It's no longer the tournament mode. That's not the case at all. We're very much looking at this as a place for newer players to come into the game mode and get somewhere to play, Not that experienced players shouldn't like it too. Like, it should be a place where you can, conquest. If you're feeling a bit of a grind in ranked conquest, maybe you want a little bit of a more casual, relaxed break. That's something that this game mode is hoping to give to players. And then, let's see. I'd say that's kind of the general gist of it. And, there's a lot more details into what the actual mode is that I won't tell you right now. But then I can talk a little bit about what the process is going to look like. And the big thing here is that we have introduced a new PvP mode a long time ago. Some players may be familiar with Stronghold, maybe even played it a few times. Not something that landed super well with the community at the time. And it's kind of become fairly unsupported. I mean, I can't remember the last time I made a change for Stronghold, so I'd say it's pretty unsupported. But the process for that game mode, and I didn't work at it at the time, so this is a bit, secondhand. But the game mode is basically completely developed internally, and then we said, "Hey guys, here's a new game mode, and we hope you like it." And obviously, that didn't really work out, and a lot of resources went into building that game mode that then didn't, maybe bring as much value as they could have. So our big goal for the new mode is that it's going to be kind of developed. Not live, that's the wrong way to say it, but there's going to be a long beta process where right now we're building a prototype internally, and the map is going to be very unrefined. The term we use in game dev that some people might recognize is gray box. There's going to be a lot of rectangular shapes and just untextured gray objects that obviously you can jump on and they block you and stuff like that. But the map is very much not done. But it is a space that we can build the game mode in. And there's some amount of terrain and some amount of, there's bases and all that stuff. But it is very, very early. But our goal is that we get the mechanics in, we get the game mode built on this map that has been spent very little resources on, and players are going to play the game mode and say, hey, this game mode is great, or this game mode is not great. We want to get that feedback early before a ton of work goes into it. Because, if we ship our first prototype and players are like, well, this is the worst game mode I've ever played, there's something to think about there. Obviously, we need to figure out, there's going to be a pretty detailed feedback process that we do with we have spear betas that we get a lot of good feedback from. So we're going to get a lot of feedback here and try to identify what are the key elements of this feedback. Are there just problems with this game mode that need to be fixed that are then going to make this game mode great? It's going to be a multi-step process for sure. I'm not saying there's going to be one beta and then feedback and then we ship it with a bunch of changes, which is, more similar in what we do with spears, just because we are, I think spears are something that we're a bit more confident in terms of this is something that we've done a ton and we know what we're looking for here. And we know that there's going to be things that need to be refined, but the overarching concept of these spears is good and we don't need a ton of runway to fix problems with them. Whereas the new game mode, maybe there are. We're going to have the first beta, there's going to be some feedback. Maybe there's a second beta with all those changes. There's more stuff to iterate on, We're really trying to make sure that we are building something that players want to play and are going to enjoy playing. Because we have seen kind of the alternative with Stronghold. Not to say that people don't like Stronghold. There are actually people that play Stronghold pretty regularly. It's just not quite what we were hoping for when developing a new game mode. It's where this is something that we want a lot of players to interact with. We especially, like I talked about, we want a bunch of new players to be able to come in and experience PvP and maybe become Conquest players because they had a lot of fun playing this new game mode. We really want to make sure that we get it right. And so there is going to be kind of this longer iterative process that we go through with, an undetermined number of beta tests, and kind of what we saw with world restructuring, I think, is an example where there's going to be a beta, there's going to be feedback, there's going to be iteration, there's going to be another beta. And once we get to a point where we feel good about the game mode, it's something that we can ship and turn on and say, hey, this is live, enjoy it.
Okay. And actually, I think we have an interesting opportunity here because Sneb and Lara have just started playing PvP, actually. I think Sneb is kind of a retired PvPer and now he's back. Okay, Lara kind of diving in. I'd really love to Yeah, I'd love to actually get kind of your takes on that and your thoughts on kind of what CMC has just said there, like from the perspective of a new player, because I don't know about you, but yeah, what Cal was talking about there regarding the new player experience, I think that is really, really true. I think it is. Conquest is pretty rough when you're learning the game, that's for sure. So I'm curious what you guys think of that.
I actually think it goes even deeper. It's how do I say this? It's as a veteran PvP player who hadn't played in a long time and went back to the game, it's not very fun to play with new players who are jumping in there and going, holy, this is super complicated. What do I do? Because what ends up happening is the top of funnel players are just so lost trying to figure it out. And then the skill discrepancy becomes super, super wide. And it doesn't seem like it should be like that at face value, but Conquest is super complicated with rotations, understanding the matchups, and the game has only become more complicated over time as you add weapons and elite specs and all of those other things. So simplifying the game mode is probably one of the best ways to get it so that it's a little bit easier for people to just jump in. And then in turn, that makes it so that players who are maybe a little bit more veteran or who are returning to the game or whatever, they won't feel like the games are as mismatched, perhaps.
Yeah, I feel this big time because I'm like a PvP newbie. I just got into PvP because of all the hype. Now I'm thinking I should have maybe waited for this new game mode. No, but it's been really fun. But like I think I'm pretty good at pressing buttons. I've killed Sarah's legendary modes, but there's this whole layer to PvP. Like, when do you rotate? Do you stay at the point? How many people stay at the point? Who goes far? There's this whole layer that I personally have found pretty tough to like start to get that game sense. Like start to like I can find somebody in 1v1, but then I'll still lose because my strategy isn't quite as good. So I think having a place where I can, you can just start off at step 1 without immediately also having to master this pretty complicated game mode sounds super, super great to me. I had a bunch of questions, but you kind of answered all of them already.
It's over.
Like, yeah.
Denied.
I have one more maybe small follow-up comment. I think that, this is just my opinion, having sort of delved a little bit deeper into PvP and World vs. World recently, I think that making it so the objective matters quite a bit really helps this. And what's odd in Conquest is that there's an objective, but I think a lot of players are like, oh, the objective is kind of whatever, because it's just like a circle on the ground. But if you have an objective that is just like really obvious, whether maybe it's like capture the flag or something like that, then suddenly players, they don't have to be the best duelist every 1v1, but they can contribute in a meaningful way by playing the objective. And right now it feels like in Conquest, when you go in, it's team deathmatch, but there are circles in the ground that sometimes people stand in.
Yeah, I think you've hit on it. I think you've hit on it really exactly there. As someone who, I'm a competitive games player. I mostly come from fighting games. And trying to get into Guild Wars PvP, I've tried it a couple times, and it's been really difficult. It's actually reminded me of fighting games a decent amount, because if you think about the kind of give and take of Guild Wars 2 PvP, like when do you use your stun break, when do you use your dodges, how do you bait things out of your opponent, how do you position, how do you read the animations of the opponent, which I totally still have a lot of trouble doing. There's a lot of fighting game elements there. So when you think about it in that way, it makes a lot of sense that a new player coming in is going to get absolutely completely stomped by players who have played for a long time. There's so much to know about the system, and if you're a new player, you don't even have the tools to start understanding some of those concepts. You're really playing at very, very different levels. So it is absolutely one of our goals. Hopefully not just with this game mode, but hopefully continuing to give players opportunities to learn some of those concepts in spaces where they're not in the same game as players who already know that. Because for the veteran players who are playing in these mismatched matches, it, like you were mentioning, Sneb, it's also frustrating because it's not. We shouldn't expect it to be on you guys to mentor people. That's not, unless you are someone who wants to do that. not why you're there. You're there to play PvP in the way that you want to play it. And fundamentally, players who are trying to learn the PvP system versus players who already know the PvP system want really different things and need really different things. So it's a really difficult problem to solve, even from like a very like 10,000 foot view, even before you start getting into the details of how you do any of that. There's some really fundamental like solutions that we need to come up with. And there's a lot of value in our PvP mode as well, because it's an evergreen system. If we're able to get it to a place where it's really healthy, that's great for the game long term. So, without going into too much detail about what we want to do with that or exactly what we want to do, it's something that we see value in. And there's a lot of really difficult problems to solve before it can be in the place where we want it to be. But this game mode that we're developing is hopefully one brick in that. And I'm really excited to do the first beta for this, having played this map a bit internally. I'm going to stop talking now so that I don't say too much. But Cal, you want
Are
to take
you
over?
excited? Are you having
Keep
fun
talking.
so far?
Yeah, I guess we'll talk about this a little bit more as we talk more about the game mode. But I'll just reiterate that it's very early. There's a lot of temporary art. And like I talked about the gray box thing, but there's a lot of things being reused just because it is a very much prototype. Like there's things that you'll see from other maps on there. There might be an SAB Angry Cloud somewhere on the prototype map. Just a lot of temporary art assets, just to make sure people realize, this is a prototype. This is a beta process. We're not pretending this is a finalized map or anything like that.
As with all of our beta processes, by engaging in them, you are helping us make the best product. And that kind of definitionally means that the product isn't necessarily going to be great yet in the beta. Maybe it is. But yeah, really excited to start working through that process with folks.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that as well. I think that Guild Wars 2 PvP, it is good, to be honest. It certainly has its issues.
I'm enjoying myself.
It's really fun.
And I think that anything that is going to help players learn is really important, because I think, to kind of touch back on what we've been talking about here, like I think that right now with Conquest, like players are essentially thrust into a situation where they have to learn how to play their character and figure out how to press their buttons and so on, and they also have to learn a complex game mode simultaneously, which is incredibly intense for that new player experience. So I really like the idea of having a game mode that is going to be more about a simple objective wise and more about just battling other players, so that players can like figure out how the game mode actually plays out and how to engage in the combat system in that mode as well. That's I think very exciting actually, and yeah, it definitely really just try to tackle the main issues that I think PvP has right now, is that players kind of struggle to get into it and then stick to the game, and then you have the players who have been there forever. They're just going like, yeah, this is gameplay, right? They're just going berserk, just farming everyone, which is
there's nowhere really to learn. Nowhere really to learn right now. There's so much to learn.
Yeah.
Even if you're a very experienced PvE player, the cadence of PvP and what's important moment to moment is totally different when you're fighting against other players versus fighting against mobs. So right now, there's just not really that space where players can learn even the core concepts, and that's a problem, right? That's definitely one of the biggest challenges with the game mode right now.
Well, we do have those profession AIs in the lobby that have shown to give some people a run for their money.
Yeah,
in 1v1s.
I have seen that, and actually, I guess kind of on that note, actually, I got a question for you, actually, CMC, from the chat here, from someone called Roy. I don't know if you've heard of this. He says, I just lost 500 to 20. When are you fixing this?
Maybe you should carry a little harder, Roy. More practice on the training dummies.
Yeah, and so maybe you can start with the Guardian NPC first, right, and then overcome that, and then make it into the actual
defeat it without dev commands challenge. Step 1.
It's pretty much impossible, I think. But yeah, are there any more comments on PvP Lara and Sneb? Any more questions regarding this topic?
I guess
don't think so.
we've talked a fair amount about making this like beginner friendly, which I as a beginner think is very important. But I guess how do you also make this engaging for those long time players, right? Those players that have like thousands and thousands of hours clocked as well. That does seem pretty challenging to me.
Yeah, it's challenging. Or sorry, go ahead, Cal. You looked like you were going to speak.
Go ahead.
Oh.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. It's
Oh.
it's a challenge. Obviously, we want to make a game mode that has some depth. It's not intended to have zero depth. It's just supposed to be something that's maybe a little bit easier to understand. Maybe the floor is a bit higher as well. So if you don't understand how to play the mode, then that isn't a huge downside. Obviously, it's much better if you do understand the goals of the game mode and like the overall objective strategy, which again, we're hoping to build something a bit simpler than Conquest so that there isn't as many opportunities to make just objectively bad decisions, like that, hey, I go stand on this capture point while someone's already there. That's just, horrendous. But there should still be some depth, some decision making, so that it is at least a little engaging to experienced players. And that is the complex challenge of the game mode, is how do we appeal to both of those player groups at the same time.
There's kind of a larger strategic way that we approach this from the design side also, not just in PvP, but in PvE also, when we're designing encounters and stuff. We try to step back and look at how players are going to potentially interact with all the stuff that we've set up, and ask ourselves, like, if a player doesn't understand any of the like mechanics, if a player is just walking and like pressing buttons in a way that they think is useful, even if they don't really understand what's going on, are they still going to be contributing in a positive way rather than like causing friction with their team because they're doing something wrong? So like an example is, imagine like a large scale fight, right? Imagine like a big meta boss where, let's say the boss, this is totally hypothetical, I'm not saying this is anywhere in the game, but just imagine the boss puts down these areas, and if anyone stands in the areas, everyone dies, right? Obviously that would be terrible in that, because that would create so much friction between players. Like, oh my god, like, don't stand in the areas. And then if you're a player that's like playing with chat off, you're just trying to chill, and you stand in the area, like all of a sudden, like you're the bad guy, right? And that sucks. So we try to like make our content both on the PvE and like with this map. One of the ways that we're doing on the PvP side is like, if a player just like walks towards the objective that is the most obvious to them and starts doing stuff there that they think is useful, are they still going to be contributing? And we're trying to make that answer like as yes as possible, while also maintaining the extra layers of depth and complexity for the players who do want to engage with that stuff. Just making sure that, one, any player can walk in and be useful and feel useful, but also reducing those moments when the different players want different things, and like that causes friction and toxicity in chat. And we are trying to use that strategy basically in this PvP mode, as well as taken from kind of how we do PvE as well in certain ways.
Yeah, that's actually super interesting to hear, and really cool insight. Thank you for sharing that, actually. And we are, in fact, kind of getting towards the end of our time here, which I hate to say it. So yeah, if we have any kind of, and this is a fully open thing to not only the other hosts, but also to the developers who have joined us here. Any kind of final thoughts or final points that we want to bring up before we wrap things up here?
I have one more hard-hitting PvP related thing.
Oh, here we go.
This is my crescendo. And it's totally okay if you can't answer this yet. One of the things I think a lot of PvP players might be concerned about, or just at least curious about, it may not even be a concern, is, okay, if you make a new game mode, do you effectively just kill Conquest? And if you do that, does that mean the new game mode becomes the monthly automated tournament? And like, how all in do you go on a new game mode? Because I think, like we saw with Stronghold, it will either take over or it will not, right? And so I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I very briefly touched on this at the start, but I'll just reiterate that our goal is not to make something that replaces Conquest. Conquest is still the premier Guild Wars 2 PvP game mode, and that's going to be true, outside of the event that we ship a new game mode and literally everyone says this mode is much better, we only want to play this mode, and people just stop playing Conquest, which I would be very surprised if that happened, but in some alternate universe maybe it happens. That would give us a reason to do that, but outside of anything crazy like that happening, it's very much the case that Conquest is still the primary game mode, it is going to be the AT game mode, it is going to be the ranked game mode, and a new game mode is intended to be like I said, kind of the more casual, laid back game mode, a good place for new players to join and play the game and learn the game, but not intended to be a replacement for Conquest. And once it eventually makes it live, you might see it in like mini seasons rotating through like the DDM modes, but it's not going to be something that's where you say, hey, this 2-month ranked period is this new game mode. It's not Conquest anymore.
So does that mean that ranked is still Conquest, I guess? And maybe you can't answer that yet, but
yeah,
I think that's what
I'm foreseeable, very much foreseeable future.
I just find that super interesting because I wonder how players will respond to that and how popular the unranked version of that will be. Cool.
I think there's still room for it to pop up, right? Because I think with the new tournament changes, like it could show up as one of the variety tournaments, right? As well, like in that system too, there could be another version of that. So I think that there's definitely still potential for it to kind of pop up in the competitive, competitive side of the game, if that's what we want to say it, like as opposed to ranked, it can still show up as a tournament and so on. But yeah, it certainly is going to be interesting to see the balance between the two game modes when it makes it to the game. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to clarify, like, once the game mode is, like, officially live, you'll probably see it as in the variety tournaments, in the off-season mini-seasons. But that's after we've identified, hey, this is the right game mode, this game is fun, and then fleshed it out and built it all out, and it is actually a real game mode with no more SAP Angry Clouds, unfortunately. But, yeah, there's still some work to be done there.
From a bit more of a strategic standpoint, also, I can kind of, in a more generalized way, one thing that we're trying to do when we make changes to our competitive modes, we do have like a goal of making them more inclusive, getting more players into them and sticking with them for longer. I mean, obviously that's a goal of ours. But at the same time, we know that those game modes have established communities that really enjoy them as they are. So we want to be careful about how we go about making those changes, because the last thing we want to do is even if we make like a change that's like really that's good at like bringing in new players, we don't want to like sacrifice our established communities for that. So we definitely don't. We want to make these changes kind of incrementally and very carefully so that we integrate the new things with the established things, and we're not driving people out of those modes that already love them and provide the backbone of keeping those modes alive. So, I know that's like super general, but I wanted to kind of voice that, where it's like we're approaching these in a very like eyes open and understanding that the established communities are really important as well, type of POV.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will just about wrap things up for this tea time, at least for now. I think I would love to give Bryan and Cal the last word, as it were, if there's anything else that you'd like to add before we disappear off into the internet again.
Oh, I was just here to answer questions. I don't know.
Okay. Can we get some wide Boris in chat, please?
Okay. Well, I mean, there you have it. Like that's what's going on, and I guess the same goes for Lara and Sneb. If you want to have a final thought right now, this would be the time. Well,
what's your favorite spear? Out of all the spears, what's your favorite?
That's a brutal question.
That's a tough one. Well, the one that I play the most is Warrior Spear, because I'm a Warrior main, and I actually really enjoy Berserk. I love playing Berserker Spear. That Primal Burst is just so like satisfying to hit. I love seeing my Char go wild throwing those spears. I also just really like I like how chill it is, kind of. There is not, we have a lot of complexity and mechanics in a lot of the weapons. The Warrior Spear is a little more chill. Not that I dislike those mechanics or anything like that, but yeah, it feels very Warrior to me. I think conceptually, maybe I really like the Ranger Spear. I love the like going back in and out of stealth. I love how on brand it is for Ranger and for oh yeah, I was going to mention this earlier, but kind of the conversation kind of moved on. One interesting thing about spears is, you know, narratively, the players learn these spear skills from the Codon, and we did some of our design with that in mind. So I like how the Ranger Spear is very like we learned this from the Codon feeling.
The Varclaw jump skill and stuff.
I
yeah.
love it's so cool. Yeah.
It's super exciting, and I guess yeah, that will just about do it. So thanks for watching, everyone here. Maybe I'll linger a little bit longer after this segment with Lara and Sneb a bit, but this is where we are going to be departing at least temporarily. Thank you so much to Bryan and Cal for being with us today and taking some time out of your schedule to talk to us and the community. There's a whole bunch of people here. Look at that, 1,000 people. Wow, very exciting times. Yeah, they're all over the place.
My favorite spear is the L spear.
Boom, there it is.
Volcanoes,
yeah,
kaboos,
yeah,
derechos,
boobing.
Yeah.
Well, great to be here. Thank you for having us on. Hopefully, folks enjoyed our answers and enjoyed watching us. If not, sorry. But maybe sometime we'll come on again.
It was really good having you.
Talk some more in the future. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for that. And of course, I hope everyone has enjoyed the show. Thanks a lot, gamers. Maybe we'll see you next time. We're out of here for now. Take it easy, my friends. We'll see you later.
See you in the mist, everyone.
Yeah, nice.